The morning of Forever Natalie Brooks woke up to golden sunlight streaming through the lace curtains of her childhood bedroom. For a moment, she forgot what day it was. Then reality crashed over her like a wave of pure joy. Today was her wedding day. After 3 years of loving James Whitmore with every fiber of her being, she would finally become his wife. She stretched languidly in bed, a smile spreading across her face as she remembered the first time they met. It was at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, where she worked as a curator. James had been there to study the architecture for a restoration project, and she had caught him staring at a Renaissance painting with such intensity that she felt compelled to approach him. "The artist spent 7 years on this piece," she had said softly. Coming to stand beside him, James had turned to look at her, and Natalie had felt her breath catch. His green eyes were striking against his dark hair, and when he smiled, dimples appeared in his cheeks. 7 years, he repeated thoughtfully. Some things are worth waiting for. She had not known then that he was talking about her. A love built on trust. Their courtship had been a dream come to life. James was everything Natalie had ever wanted in a partner. He was thoughtful, leaving her favorite coffee on her desk before important meetings. He was supportive, attending every gallery opening she organized, even when his work schedule was overwhelming. He was romantic, planning surprise weekend getaways to coastal towns where they would walk on the beach and talk about their future. But more than anything, he made her feel safe. After a childhood spent watching her parents' messy divorce, Natalie had built walls around her heart. James had dismantled them brick by brick with his patience and unwavering devotion. "I will never hurt you," he had promised her the night he proposed, kneeling in their favorite spot at the public garden. "I would rather die than cause you pain." She had believed him with her whole heart. She still believed him, even now. As she slipped into her wedding dress with Rachel's help, the dress and the gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate lace. With a sweetheart neckline and a flowing train that made her feel like a princess. Catherine Whitmore, James's mother, had insisted on paying for it, calling it a gift from one generation to the next. "You are everything I hoped for my son," Catherine had said when they went shopping together. "You have brought light back into his life." Natalie had wondered what she meant by that. But Catherine had quickly changed the subject, leaving her curious but content. Now, as Rachel fastened the last button on her dress, Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. "I cannot believe this is actually happening," she whispered. Rachel squeezed her hand. "You deserve every bit of happiness, Nat. James is lucky to have you." "I am the lucky one," Natalie replied, thinking of all the small ways James showed his love. The way he remembered she hated mornings and always let her sleep in on weekends. The way he listened to her ramble about obscure art history facts without ever looking bored. The way he held her hand during scary movies. Even though he thought they were silly, the church and the crowd, St. Mary's Church, was decorated exactly as they had planned. White roses and hydrangeas lined the aisle, their fragrance filling the air. Candles flickered in tall brass holders, casting a warm glow over the wooden pews. 200 guests filled the church, including colleagues from the museum, James's architecture firm, and friends from college. Thomas Brooks, Natalie's father, looked distinguished in his gray suit as he waited to walk her down the aisle. Despite the divorce from her mother years ago, he had remained a constant presence in her life, and she was grateful to have him by her side today. "You look beautiful." "Sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you ready?" Natalie nodded, clutching her bouquet of white peonies. Her heart was racing with anticipation. In just a few minutes, she would see James waiting for her at the altar, and they would exchange vows that would bind them together forever. The music began. The doors opened. Natalie took her first step down the aisle, her eyes searching for James at the front of the church, but the altar was empty. The phone call. That changed everything at first. Natalie thought she was mistaken. Perhaps James was just running late, stuck in traffic, dealing with some last-minute emergency. But as she reached the front of the church and turned to face the empty space where he should have been standing, confusion turned to concern. The priest looked uncomfortable. The guests began whispering. Rachel appeared at her side, worry etched across her features. "Where is he?" Natalie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before anyone could answer, Catherine rushed in from the side entrance, her face pale and streaked with tears. "He is gone," she said, her voice breaking. "He left." Words did not make sense. Natalie shook her head, refusing to accept what she was hearing. "What do you mean he left? Where did he go?" "I do not know," Catherine sobbed. "He got a phone call 30 minutes ago. He went white as a sheet, grabbed his jacket, and ran out. I tried to stop him, but he would not listen. He just kept saying he was sorry over and over again." The bouquet slipped from Natalie's fingers, white petals scattering across the marble floor. The church seemed to tilt around her, and if Rachel had not caught her arm, she might have fallen. The unanswered questions, someone suggested calling James. But when Natalie tried his number with shaking hands, it went straight to voicemail. She tried again, and again. Each time, the mechanical voice informed her that the subscriber was unavailable. "This cannot be happening," she whispered. "He loves me," he promised. But promises, she was learning, could be broken as easily as hearts. The guests were dismissed with awkward explanations. The reception at the hotel was canceled. The cake was returned. The flowers were donated to a nursing home. And the life Natalie had imagined for herself vanished in the space of an hour. That night, alone in her apartment, still wearing her wedding dress because she could not bear to take it off, Natalie called James's number one more time. This time, instead of ringing, recorded message informed her that the number was no longer in service. He had not just left her at the altar. He had disappeared completely, taking with him every explanation, every reason, every chance for closure. And as Natalie finally let herself cry, collapsing onto her bed in a pile of silk and shattered dreams, she could not shake the feeling that she would never understand why. The man she loved, the man who had promised to never hurt her, had broken her in the worst way possible, and the cruel irony was that she still loved him, even as she hated him. Even as she mourned the death of the future they would never have. Tomorrow would begin the long, painful process of trying to move on. But tonight, Natalie let herself grieve for what she had lost, and for the questions that would haunt her for the next year of her life. The first month of survival, the days after the wedding that never was blurred together like watercolors in the rain. Natalie called in sick to work for 2 weeks straight. Unable to face the pitying looks and whispered conversations she knew would follow her through the museum halls. Rachel stayed with her, bringing soup that went uneaten and tissues that were used by the boxful. "You need to eat something," Rachel would plead, but Natalie could barely taste anything. Food turned to ash in her mouth, and sleep brought only nightmares where she walked down the aisle over and over again. Reaching for a man who always vanished just before she could touch him, Thomas came by every evening after work. Sitting with his daughter in companionable silence when words failed. Sometimes he would hold her hand. Sometimes he would simply be there, solid presence in a world that had become untethered and strange. Catherine called repeatedly, her own grief and confusion evident in every conversation. "I do not understand," she would say, crying alongside Natalie. "He was so happy. He talked about you constantly. The morning of the wedding, he told me he was the luckiest man alive." Those words cut deeper than silence would have. What could have changed between that morning declaration and the moment he fled? The investigation begins by the second month. Natalie's grief had transformed into a desperate need for answers. She hired Detective Harold Bennett, a former police officer turned private investigator with a reputation for finding people who did not want to be found. Bennett was a stocky man in his 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. He listened to Natalie's story without interrupting, taking notes in a worn leather notebook. "I have seen cases like this before," he said gently. "Usually there is a reason. Not always a good one, but a reason nonetheless." "Can you find him?" Natalie asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "I can try, but you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that he does not want to be found. And if that is the case, you need to decide if knowing why is worth prolonging your pain." Natalie did not hesitate. "I need to know. Even if the truth destroys me, I need to know." Bennett worked for 3 months following every lead, tracking credit card statements, interviewing James's colleagues at the architecture firm. But it was as if James Whitmore had simply ceased to exist. His apartment had been cleared out the week after the wedding. His bank accounts were closed. His phone was disconnected. His social media profiles were deleted. Whoever he is running from, or whatever he is running from, he is good at disappearing, Bennett finally reported. I am sorry, Miss Brooks. I have exhausted every avenue I can think of. The therapy sessions by month 4. Natalie's friends insisted she see someone. Dr. Patricia Green had an office in Back Bay. All soothing colors and soft lighting designed to make broken people feel safe enough to fall apart. Tell me about James, Dr. Green said during their first session, her voice professionally gentle. Natalie found herself talking for an hour straight, describing every moment of their relationship, analyzing every conversation for clues she might have missed. I keep thinking there must have been signs, she said. Something I overlooked?
Yeah.
Or perhaps there were no signs, Dr. Green suggested. Perhaps this truly came from nowhere, which is why it is so difficult to process. Over the following months, Dr. Green helped Natalie understand that she was grieving not just the loss of James, but the loss of the future she had envisioned. The house they would buy, the children they would raise, the life they would build together, brick by brick, year by year. You are allowed to be angry, Dr. Green told her. You are allowed to hate him for what he did. But Natalie found she could not hate James no matter how hard she tried. Beneath the anger and confusion, the love remained, stubborn and unwilling to die. Rebuilding a life by month 7, Natalie had returned to work full-time. The museum had been patient with her, and she threw herself into her job with renewed intensity. If she could not control her personal life, at least she could control her professional one. She curated a new exhibit on Renaissance art, working 16-hour days to ensure every detail was perfect. Her colleagues worried about her, but Natalie insisted she was fine. Fine had become her favorite lie. She went on a few dates, set up by well-meaning friends who thought she needed to move on. But sitting across from men who were not James, making small talk about jobs and hobbies and favorite movies, felt like a betrayal. She would make excuses to leave early, then go home and cry. Hating herself for still loving a man who had abandoned her, Rachel remained her constant companion, dragging her to yoga classes and girls' nights and anything that might distract her from the gaping hole in her life. You are going to be okay, Rachel would say. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Natalie wanted to believe her. The anniversary of heartbreak 1 year after the wedding that never was. Natalie woke up feeling oddly calm. She had survived 365 days without James. She had learned to sleep through the night without dreaming of him. She had stopped checking her phone every 5 minutes. Hoping for a message that would never come, she decided to spend the day doing something for herself. Something that had nothing to do with James or their failed relationship. She went to her favorite bookstore, bought 3 novels she had been meaning to read, and treated herself to lunch at a café overlooking the Charles River. It was there, sitting by the window with a half-eaten sandwich and a cup of tea, that she saw him, the impossible Saitat first. Natalie thought her mind was playing tricks on her. It had happened before, those cruel moments when she would see someone with dark hair and green eyes and her heart would leap, only to realize it was a stranger. But this was no stranger. James Whitmore stood on the sidewalk across the street. Looking thinner than she remembered, his hair longer, his face marked by lines that had not been there a year ago. He wore a jacket she did not recognize and carried himself. With a weariness that made her chest ache, he was staring directly at the cafe. Directly at her, Natalie's hands began to shake so violently that tea slopped over the rim of her cup. She stood up so quickly that her chair fell backward with a crash. Other diners turned to stare, but she did not care. She had waited a year for this moment, and she was not going to let him disappear again. She ran out of the cafe, nearly tripping over her own feet, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. James, she shouted, her voice breaking on his name. He did not run. He simply stood there, watching her approach with an expression she could not read. Pain, maybe? Regret? Fear? When she reached him, They stood facing each other on the busy sidewalk, a year of silence and suffering stretching between them like an unbridgeable chasm. "Hello, Natalie," he said quietly, and his voice was exactly as she remembered, warm and deep and achingly familiar. For a moment she could not speak. 1,000 questions crowded her throat, each one demanding to be asked first. But what came out was simply, why? The confrontation, James flinched, as if the single word had struck him physically. His green eyes, once so full of warmth when they looked at her, now held a depth of sorrow that made Natalie want to both embrace him and scream at him simultaneously. "Can we talk somewhere private?" he asked, glancing around at the pedestrians flowing past them on the sidewalk. "You want private?" Natalie heard her voice rising, a year of suppressed emotion bubbling to the surface. "You disappeared for a year without a word, and now you want privacy. You do not get to make requests, James. You answer my questions right here. Right now, or I walk away and you never get another chance." A flash of pain crossed his features, but he nodded. "You are right. You deserve answers." He took a shaky breath. "The phone call I received that morning was from Diana." "Diana," Natalie repeated, confused. "Your sister?" She had heard about Diana Whitmore only in passing. James rarely spoke about his family beyond his mother, and Natalie had assumed there was some sort of estrangement. She had met Diana exactly once, briefly, at a family dinner 6 months before the wedding. The woman had been cold and distant, leaving early with barely a goodbye. "She told me that if I married you, you would die," James said, his voice hollow. The unbelievable story. Natalie stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What are you talking about? Can we please sit down?" James gestured to a bench near the river. "This is going to take a while." Against her better judgment, Natalie followed him. They sat at opposite ends of the bench, a careful distance between them, and James began to speak. "You know I inherited money from my grandfather," he started. "What you do not know is exactly how much. $23 million to be exact." Natalie's eyes widened. She had known James came from money, but she had never asked specifics. It had not mattered to her. "My grandfather's will had conditions," James continued, his hands clenched together so tightly his knuckles were white. "The primary heir would receive the full inheritance, but only if they remained unmarried until age 35, or if they married someone from a pre-approved list of families." "That is archaic," Natalie breathed. "My grandfather was a controlling man who believed in keeping wealth within certain circles. I turned 35 6 months before I met you, so I thought I was free. I could marry whoever I wanted." His voice cracked. "I was wrong." The hidden clause. James explained that there was a secondary clause in the will, known only to his sister Diana, who served as executor of their grandfather's estate. If James married someone deemed unsuitable, and if he died under suspicious circumstances within 5 years of the marriage, the entire inheritance would pass to Diana instead. "Diana has always been obsessed with money," James said bitterly. "She has made terrible financial decisions, invested in failed businesses, gambled away her own inheritance. She was desperate, and she saw you as an obstacle." "So she threatened me?" Natalie asked, trying to make sense of this nightmare. "She did more than threaten. She hired someone." James finally looked directly at Natalie, and she saw tears streaming down his face. "The morning of our wedding, she called me and told me she had paid a man named Robert Caldwell to kill you. Not immediately, but within a few months. An accident," she said. "A car crash or a home invasion. Something that would not point back to her." Natalie felt the world tilt around her. "You cannot be serious. She sent me proof. Photos of you at the museum, walking home from work, sleeping in your apartment." James's voice dropped barely a whisper. "She had been watching you for weeks. She told me that if I went through with the wedding, you would be dead within 3 months. But if I left, if I disappeared and never contacted you again, she would leave you alone." The impossible choice. The words hung in the air between them, each one more devastating than the last. Natalie felt like she was in a nightmare from which she could not wake. "You expect me to believe that your sister planned to murder me over money?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I know how it sounds," James said desperately. "I know it seems impossible. But Diana has always been unstable. Our father committed suicide when we were teenagers, and she has never recovered. She blames the world for her problems and will do anything to fix them. So you just left. Natalie felt anger rising through her shock. You made this decision for me without telling me, without giving me a choice. What choice was there? James shot back. Stay and watch you die. Tell you the truth and risk Diana following through anyway out of spite? I was trapped, Natalie. I chose the option that kept you alive. You chose to break my heart and leave me with nothing. Natalie stood up, pacing in front of the bench. Do you have any idea what this year has been like? The questions, the self-doubt, the wondering what I did wrong. I thought I was losing my mind. I know, James said miserably. I watched you from a distance. I saw you hire the detective. I saw you going to therapy. I saw you struggling, and it killed me every single day. But you were alive, Natalie. That was all that mattered. The evidence emerges if this is true. If any of this is actually true, then why are you here now? Natalie demanded. What changed? Diana got arrested 2 weeks ago, James said. Not for plotting against you, but for embezzlement. She stole money from a charity she was managing. During the investigation, they found her communications with Caldwell, the man she hired. He was already in prison for an unrelated assault charge, and he turned on her immediately. Confessing to everything in exchange for a reduced sentence? James pulled out his phone and showed Natalie a news article. There was Diana's face, being led out of a courthouse in handcuffs, her expression defiant. The police contacted me 3 days ago, James continued. They needed me to provide information about Diana's state of mind, financial situation, any threats she might have made. That is when I learned she had been bluffing. Bluffing, Natalie repeated. Caldwell confessed that Diana paid him to surveil you and send threatening messages to me. But he was never actually going to hurt you. He said Diana was delusional, that she thought scaring me would be enough. She never had a real plan to kill anyone. She was just a desperate, mentally ill woman who made terrible threats she could not follow through on. The weight of truth, Natalie sank back onto the bench, her mind reeling. So you left me at the altar, destroyed our lives because of a threat that was never real. I did not know that, James said, his voice breaking. How could I have known? She had photos. She had Caldwell's name and history. She was completely convincing. I thought I was saving your life. They sat in silence for a long moment, watching the river flow past, carrying leaves and debris toward the ocean. A year of pain and misunderstanding stretched between them, and Natalie did not know if the truth made things better or worse. You should have told me, she finally said. We should have gone to the police together. We should have faced this together. You're right, James agreed. I was terrified, and I made the wrong choice. I thought I was being noble, sacrificing my happiness for your safety. But all I did was hurt us both. The path forward, Natalie looked at the man she had loved, the man she had mourned. The man who had made a terrible decision in an attempt to protect her. She could see the year of suffering written on his face, mirroring her own pain. I do not know if I can forgive you, she said honestly. You took away my choice. You decided what was best for me without asking what I wanted. No, James said, and I am not asking for forgiveness. I just needed you to know the truth. I needed you to understand that leaving you was the hardest thing I have ever done, and that I never stopped loving you. Not for a single moment. Natalie felt tears streaming down her face. I never stopped loving you either. But love is not always enough, James. Trust matters. Partnership matters. Making decisions together matters. You are right, he said again, and I will spend the rest of my life regretting that I did not trust in us enough to face this together. They sat there on the bench as the afternoon light faded into evening. Two people who had loved each other deeply and lost each other completely because of fear and secrets and impossible choices. What happens now? James finally asked. Natalie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision before her. She could walk away, nurse her wounds, and try to build a life without him. Or she could take a leap of faith, knowing that healing would be difficult and that trust would have to be rebuilt piece by piece. Now, she said slowly, you are going to tell me everything. Every detail about what happened this year, where you went, what you did, how you survived, and then we are going to decide together if there is any way forward for us. James looked at her with such hope and gratitude that fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. "Anything," he promised. "I will tell you anything you want to know." As they began to talk, really talk, for the first time in a year, Natalie felt something shift inside her. The anger was still there, and the hurt, and the betrayal. But beneath it all, the love remained. Battered and bruised, but still alive. She did not know if they could rebuild what they had lost. She did not know if she could ever fully trust him again, but she knew that she wanted to try. Because some loves are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible.